And I'd like to remind you again, as you leave the conference, please leave your lanyards there. There is a box. And as we are trying to be sustainable, we would not like to waste a lot. You can take your ID cards. The lanyards you can drop in the bin that is available. Requesting everyone to please settle down. We'll start with the next session. So welcome back, everyone. I hope you had an energizing lunch. We also have Energize coming up this year. So up next, we focus on MSMEs, the backbone of India's economy. Facing challenges like outdated technologies, high operational costs, and limited access to finance, MSMEs are under pressure for emission reduction and stronger ESG performance. This session will explore scalable solutions to empower these MSMEs, focusing on demand aggregation, innovative ESCO-backed financing, and third-party verification, and the leadership role of industry associations. Key topics will include policy interventions, capacity building, and lessons that have been learned from the past challenges. So, as I call upon the speakers, I would request them to take the stage, please. So this session would be curated by Mr. Sanjeev Bhatia, President of Stenum Asia. Sir, please. Next, we have Mr. Anish Jain, Principal of AFRI. Next, we have Ms. Manya Ranjan, co-founder of 2.0 Capital. I'm very sorry. Mr. Saibal Sain, President, IIF Western Region. And last but not the least, we have Mr. Sarabjit Singh Saini, Mitigation Analyst from UNDP. Thank you, sir. Please take the stage. One last thing, we'll be using a Mentimeter for this session, so you can keep your QR scans ready. And as Sir says, we can start the poll.
So, good afternoon. This is the difficult session in timing, second day of the event after lunch. But hopefully we'll make it very interesting and you'll have some good takeaways from here. I see a lot of places empty in the front. If you want to move ahead, you can move ahead. anytime during the session. So, this is a session on SMEs, and I'm really privileged and happy to have some very experienced and interesting panelists for this session. But before we start, there's a little trivia question, maybe, which will get the adrenaline going, maybe, or gray cells running as well. So can we have that, please, on the screen? So the question is, how many SMEs do you think will list on the Indian stock exchanges in the next 10 years? Okay, I think we're getting the trend, so we can pause at this stage, right? You all seem a little pessimistic about what's likely to happen. So a few days back, the CEO of the Bombay Stock Exchange said that he expects at least 60,000 SMEs to list on the stock exchange. We currently have about 1,000. And the reason I wanted to put this up was that not only are SMEs, super important for the economy, but they are also, let's say, underrated. They don't get the limelight, they don't get the focus that they deserve. And one example of that I can give you, or a comparison, is when we make cities, for example. The road networks that we build in our cities are generally meant for car owners. We ignore everybody else, the pedestrian, public transport. Similarly, in media, most of the time, headlines are about large companies or startup unicorns. You very rarely get news about SMEs. But the SMEs are the backbone of the economy for almost every country, India included, whether it's employment, whether it's economic value added, whether it is exports. So we're going to talk about the underrated, the not so celebrated sector of the economy, but perhaps in the context of what we are talking about, and if the future predictions are right that many of these SMEs are going to become larger companies, then it's actually the sector to talk about, right? So in this session, we have four very experienced people who will share not only their experience, but also will, give their wisdom, their advice from what they have seen, so that there are some very solid takeaways from the session. And may I just ask each of the panelists just to give a 1- and 2-line introduction about themselves, and maybe Sabjit, we'll start from your side.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Sarabjot Singh Saini. I'm working as a mitigation analyst with United Nations Development Program, and almost 12 years experience working with MSMEs in various clusters, predominantly on the energy efficiency and resource utilization side.
Good afternoon, everybody. First of all, I'd like to thank AEEE and FEED 25 for getting me on this panel. It's an honor to be on the panel with all of you. Happy to meet all of you. And it's a very important subject that we are addressing in this conference. I would just give my introduction as my association with the Institute of Indian Foundrymen rather than my business, because that won't be very relevant here. The Institute of Indian Foundrymen is an association all India, which has more than 3,500 members, more than 2,000 foundry company members, and we are a non-profit organization. So I am in the chair of the Western region, and we try to take forward all initiatives for the foundry sector in India through IIF. Thank you.
Hi everyone, good afternoon. This is Mani Ranjan. I'm a co-founder of a climate finance platform called 2.0 Capital. Very excited to be here. Thank you for having me on the panel. And one of the main reasons of our existence is to help SMEs, MSMEs become greener, more cost efficient, and more globally integrated. So would love to talk further on that as we move into the panel. Thank you.
Hello, good afternoon everyone. My name is Anish. I am a principal at AFRI, which is a global consulting organization. One of my recent experiences has been leading a coalition bringing together the construction value chain, working with large developers and builders, and looking at how they can work with their supply chain to have greener products in their procurement.
All right, thank you, gentlemen. And to kickstart, maybe, Saibal, let me start with yourself, because you run an enterprise and you are also involved with members' organizations. So it would be interesting to start with you. So what, in your opinion, do you see as the biggest challenge for MSMEs in your sector? Because you will have a lot of knowledge about the foundry sector.
Yeah.
And when it comes to decarbonization, how is your industry association addressing this? You know, maybe there are lessons for everyone to take away from how you are addressing this particular issue.
Sure. Thank you. To start with, if you allow me, I'd like to quote two quotes. One which Sir George Jessel said, that the human brain starts working from the time you're born. It doesn't stop, but only sometimes stops when you stand up to talk in public. So I hope my brain works today with all the questions you throw at me. Okay. So yes, decarbonization challenges for MSMEs is a major challenge, especially in the foundry sector, which I represent here. In the foundry sector, as you are all aware, that we've been talking of cooling over the last 2 days in this conference all the time. And the foundries are mainly dealing with heat all the time. You're melting metal at high temperatures, and it's all heat, heat, and heat. So there are very high energy costs. The melting operations, the melting contributes about 75% of the energy costs in foundries. Auxiliary equipment like compressors, sand plant, etc., they an addition of 15 to 20%. So therefore, the main challenge is the knowledge gaps. That is the lack of awareness about energy efficient practices and technologies. So that is something we try to address through IIF, where we organize regional conferences, we organize regional trainings through trainers, and we try to make them very much project-based, not just programmatic. You know, we handhold the foundries and take them through the training process. And the other main challenge is financial and manpower constraints. That, as we all know, that in MSMEs, one person wears many hats. So you really don't have skilled expertise, focused skilled expertise on any particular subject in the MSME. They're all experts, but they're overall like experts, jack of all trades kind of experts. So that is a challenge definitely. And of course, finance, initial investments become a challenge, because to upgrade to technology for sustainability and for energy conservation, to save energy, you need to go for the latest techniques, latest technologies. So financial and manpower constraints is another thing as a challenge for decarbonization. And regulatory pressures, yes, evolving ESG norms create some kind of an additional compliance burden on the small businesses, which is not an excuse. We all have to fall in line. but it becomes a challenge for MSMEs also, the regulatory norms that are coming in. These are my few things to start with.
Okay, thanks. I think I'll pick on one of those definitely later on, which is the knowledge gap part, because I think we see a lot of capacity building programs from different institutions and all, but what would be interesting to know is how do you make sure that implementation happens later on in scaling up? So we'll come back to that. Sarabjit, coming to you, because you are from UNDP, very well-known, very large development institution. It would be interesting to know the interventions you have made to help MSMEs adopt, energy efficiency. What have been your challenges and learnings from there?
Right. I think, Sanjeev, MSME sector is very unique. The intervention carried out by any development organization, and for that matter, any government agency, needs to be very focused on the challenges faced by the MSMEs. When we are planning the activities, or when we are, drafting any policies for MSMEs, we need to think and we need to be there in their shoes. When we draft the policies, when we draft any project for the MSMEs, whether it is energy efficiency or for that matter any other topic, I think that is the crux that I want to highlight here. And as part of UNDP is working primarily with the secondary steel sector here in India, and we started our project way back in 2003, the first phase. Then we have the second phase till 2017, and then the third phase we recently concluded last year in December. And I think the main idea here is, you rightly pointed out, on the implementation side. We need to now focus on the implementation. Now there are many agencies who are doing the energy audits, energy assessments are being done, but there is a requirement of hand-holding these MSMEs for implementations. In my opinion, like I visited many steel industries as well as the other industry during my career of almost 13-14 years, the industry owners and the supervisor there at the shop floor, they, at most of the time know what they are doing and what are the energy gaps. It's just that they need that kind of hand-holding so that they can, take up the projects and implement those projects in their units. And therein, I think the organizations like UNDP or a World Bank or the development organization, and for that matter, the state government DIC units and also the national nodal agencies needs to handhold these MSMEs so that they can understand the technologies and also try to, implement these technologies. And from UNDP project, we implemented more than 360 projects in secondary steel sector. And out of these 360 projects, we conducted one assessment as well in 2015, and there were replication of around 400 projects without any support from UNDP. So I think that is the main crux here. When the MSMEs get to know that the projects are beneficial and they are getting the benefits from the word of mouth, from the demo pilot projects, then they start replicating those projects even in other clusters as well. Like in our recently concluded projects, we did almost in 124 units, we did implementations across 4 steel clusters in India. So that is, I think, kind of attitude we need to have, and also the industry owners also needs to be very proactive. So there are some key challenges and also some challenges highlighted by Mr. Sen. I think these are there, but I think the requirement here is to handhold those MSMEs, owners, unit owners, so that they can, go ahead and implement those technologies.
And Sarabjit, from your experience, when an institution like UNDP, or for that matter any other, does an intervention, and you step back, you see that the replication happens because you've created a set of companies or who have adopted your thing. Do others pick that up? Does it sort of keep happening on its own afterwards, or do we need more frequent interventions?
Right. I think, like I already
from
mentioned,
a scaling perspective, I'm saying.
Scaling perspective, right. Like I already mentioned, if like in secondary steel sector, during our first phase of the project during 2003 to to 2008, they get to know that, having the direct rolling technology is going to benefit them very well, because there is a complete elimination of reheating furnace in that case. So they are getting the benefits, monetary benefits as well, and then there is a benefit of having the low carbon emissions of that particular industry. So that kind of technology needs to be there, that kind of demonstration needs to be there, which is very well proven there and have the positive impact on the MSMEs. So I think that kind of technologies other MSMEs can easily replicate when they get to know that this particular technologies have reaped benefits, and the owners get benefits already. So I think the word of mouth thing, and also some intervention, exchange visits, these kinds of steps also helps out to replicate wider application of these kinds of technologies.
Right. Thanks for that. So let's take another view of another sector, Anish. Your expertise is in what I understood is building materials and supply chain. Would you also share, please, your experience of what you have observed or seen, how SMEs either take on the energy efficiency initiatives, or if not, what can be done in the supply chain side to get them to do that? Especially, we now have, if it's an export value chain, for example, you have challenge like a CBAM coming in, right? So it'd be great to hear from you.
Sure, thanks, Sanjeev. So speaking from the construction value chain experience that we had recently, even working with large construction sector organizations, builders, if they have high ambitions in terms of moving towards low carbon or green procurement, when they start working with their supply chain, speaking to the SMEs or even the larger suppliers, a lot of the challenges that were mentioned start coming up. There is a lack of data around what is the energy consumption of the products that they are procuring, what is the carbon intensity of the products. And these are the kind of parameters that mechanisms like CBAM are now asking for. Like the carbon intensity really needs to be well measured and disclosed. So as has been shared, there is a strong need for hand-holding the small suppliers to start measuring, understanding why they need to measure, have the tools to measure, and then also have the capacity, both technically and financially, to start measuring and disclosing their data. So similar challenge then comes when we speak to the demand side as to when a buyer goes to the suppliers, they need to find the right data, and then these challenges need to be addressed at the same time.
And I'm guessing that in the domestic scenario with the BRSR coming in, where large companies have to now report and start also reporting some of the supply chain related metrics, this will also impact the MSME in some sense, right? Not just the export value chain, but the domestic one also.
Right, absolutely. As you said, so the BRSR definitely is a step in that direction in terms of the large companies also having to look at their supply chain. There have, of course, been some changes in the BRSR requirements, but at least now companies are requiring to look at their supply chains and talk to their suppliers from large to small to understand what is really the energy consumption, the carbon intensity of the products that they are buying. Because the largest part of most of these companies' emissions comes from those scope 3 emissions from the suppliers.
And I think from the experience I've had with MSMEs over the last 17 years, when you go to ask for data from MSMEs or you want to work with them, so you get this question many times, आपको कौन सी data चाहिए, जो pollution control board को दे रहे हैं या आपको जो चाहिए, right? So that's another sort of challenge, I think, in the practical sense that we have to overcome when we, have our takeaways from here, that there is these peculiarities in India particularly. But the reason I mentioned this stock exchange number earlier was because I've also seen this trend, that there's a lot more corporate governance and these practices coming into the SMEs, particularly the small and medium who aspire to grow bigger. So I think we have a very nice set up here for you, Manya, because someone did mention finance gaps, right? And I think this would be very interesting to hear from you. What are the main barriers you think for MSMEs in accessing finance for adopting energy efficiency? You know, keeping in mind that when we talk about companies who say we are in climate finance or whatever, a lot of the money goes into buying electric vehicles or solar PV. So, you know, we are talking about energy efficiency inside the factories, inside, the operation. So, if you help us understand how this can be addressed from a private finance perspective, because we already have some schemes with SIDBI and the others, but what's the role here of the private finance?
Yeah. No, sure, Sanjeev. Thanks for that question. And I think a great point made by everyone. Before I begin answering that, I just wanted to put down some baseline numbers, which I think everybody knows, but just for context, right, what are we dealing with, right? MSMEs together, they constitute about 30% of India's GDP, roughly, right? Again, ballpark numbers. They are about 45 to 50% of India's manufacturing output, right? And a large share of our export output, right? So it's a very large part of our economy that I think it was rightly mentioned that we don't, I think you mentioned that, we don't hear about them a lot, we don't understand them, we don't put ourselves in their shoes to understand the pain points because it is quite real, right? And just a couple of points that we got really excited before starting this platform. MSMEs are going to get impacted by the CBAMs of the world, the headwinds that are coming from that direction because, like it or not, we are moving in that direction. On top of that, the access to formal credit is very poor, right? About only 40% of MSMEs have access to formal credit, period, like across any segment. So if you're talking about, again, numbers are rough, but from $10 billion to $50 billion a year of investment that is required in this segment for clean energy interventions, non-solar, non-mobility, where is that going to come from, right? That is one data point, right? Exhibit A. Exhibit B, it's a very fragmented landscape, right? As you rightly mentioned, data is all over the place, many different players who are solving for their own benefit. It is not a mature ecosystem where you have a standard model, capital can flow in, contract structures are strong, counterparties know their roles and responsibilities. It is not there. And therefore, the effort that it takes to get it from the current state to, let's say, a solar today, which is plug and play, right? A PPA structure is a PPA structure. How does that work for us in energy efficiency, performance contracting, shared savings, deemed savings, this, that, and the other? It's a complicated landscape, and therefore, a typical pool of capital, a typical financing body, private or public, is not able to really get in. Right? There are too many barriers for them to jump through. And therefore, this has to be started from people who know the sector, who know the operating nuances of the sector, but look at it from a very strong financial lens. I mean, then coming to the specific question, right? So I think one of the things that we feel very strongly is having a very robust contracting structure, right? Which creates the mechanism for private capital to get in. The private capital will not get in when the contracting structure is weak or loose. And to get that at scale, a lot of effort has to be built in. Again, classical solar sector, what is the PPA equivalent for us? The contracts have to be watertight, people need to understand their roles. A lot of things have to be clarified. So I think those are the near-term barriers. But in the long term, let me tell you, the amount of capital that is looking to move into this segment is pretty immense. They're not able to find a vehicle to get in. We would love for us to be one of the vehicles. But at the same time, the journey that we're on, we require the whole, as we say, right, it takes a village. We require the whole village to come in and make this happen. It's a problem it's a challenge that we get excited, daunted, and motivated about. But I think there's a lot happening here.
No, thanks for that. And if time permits, I'd like to, then explore this idea of blended finance, which might be one of the solutions going forward. But just continuing with this, the finance piece, Sarabjit, I think one of the challenges for finance to come in is, do we have a taxonomy? Is everybody who's lending clear about this? Would you share some thoughts on, the taxonomy piece? Did it come across in any of your work? And, if so, has it helped or will it help in future?
Right. I think, Sanjeev, here, if you talk about the financial aspect is one, but like you just mentioned about the taxonomy, and we were also discussing during the session that now Ministry of Steel has already come up with the green steel taxonomy. So basically, it is related to the global EU level, that CBAM that we already have, cross-border adjustment mechanism. So green steel taxonomy is, kind of a catalyzer for Indian industry to comply with that CBAM. So this green steel taxonomy is released by Ministry of Steel in December last year. And therein, there is a rating for the green units as well, the units which are producing the steel. So they define threshold as 2.2 ton of carbon emission per ton of finished steel is the baseline. The industry which is, going to, exceed that baseline, they will be given the ratings, basically 2-star, 3-star and 4-star. And I think this is a very welcome step from the government point of view and also for the industry to, prepare themselves even for the MSMEs, because the CBAM currently is majorly applicable to the larger industries, larger steel producers like JSW or Tata Steel. But eventually, this kind of regulation will going to come for the MSMEs as well, who are planning to expand for the export market there. So this present green steel taxonomy will really going to help those MSMEs to, prepare themselves to enhance their energy efficiency and meet the global emission guidelines. I think this is a very welcome step, and I think we as a development organization or for, the ecosystem where, MSME works really needs to handhold those MSMEs to comply with these kinds of regulations.
Thanks.
Can I
please.
Yeah, regarding CBAM, yes, of course, as you mentioned, it's very, very important even for the MSME foundry sector now, small, medium, large, because the MSME foundry sector of India, they are looking at global expansion. Now, India is the second largest producer of castings after China. And Indian foundries play a major role in the export revenue of the country, exporting millions of tons of castings all over the world. So when they want to, get into the European Union and export there, the CBAM is going to play a major role because they'll have tax added on to their product unless they are CBAM qualified. So yes, this will be very important for the MSME sector to look into CBAM. Yeah.
And I think many still don't know of the implications of this, because even the main industry will get impacted in a year or two, and then it'll take maybe another 1-2 years for the MSMEs. So that kind of brings me back to that point, Sehbal, you made about knowledge gaps, and here is another knowledge gap to be proactive in trying to close. Yeah. But I'm just curious that a lot of capacity building has happened over the years, keeps happening for the MSMEs. In your experience, what's a good way to make sure that that sticks and then there is scaling up of that and implementation of that knowledge?
Yeah, you see, with the MSME foundry sector, our association, that the Institute of Indian Foundrymen, we are trying our best to have customized training programs on both fronts. One is the technical side, as well as the commercial side of taxation and CBAM and all that. On the technical side, the training programs, we are not only looking at training the mid-level, shop floor level managers, because what happens is when the expert trainers take these ideas to that level and then it goes to the top level, they take a decision to implement the equipment or the technology. But the major execution also lies with the ground level, that's the workers on the shop floor. So we are also now focusing on training that level to make them aware that, when you do energy conservation with a higher grade of technology and you put up latest equipment, you save money for the business and the business earns more profit, but which is important for the top management and the company as a whole. But we are trying to train the shop floor workers that, how energy conservation is going to help climate change, global warming, and how in the future this is going to be important for your own family, for the next generation. So we are also focusing on that ground level awareness for the workers to know that climate change and global warming is very important for life, for you, apart from the profits that the company will make by implementing higher technology for sustainability. So we are also trying to tell them a very important thing that, today sustainability, climate change, global warming, etc. is required to look into it. But tomorrow it will be a must for your next generation. So that is how the association comes in to help the foundry sector to understand both the sides, the taxation side with seminars, workshops, and regional trainings. We have regional conferences on this subject, and also training the ground level on global warming, basically.
And Anish, in your experience with the supply chain side in your industry sectors that you worked, have you seen or observed that the larger companies in any way are helping the MSMEs on these challenges? Is that visible or is that not visible? Are they helping them in some way?
So yes, definitely there are some very progressive large organizations who have their global targets as well as net zero targets in place, and they do realize the importance of working with the supply chain. So as an example, a very large construction company we were working in Mumbai used to hold an annual suppliers meet where they have more than 150 small suppliers across different parts. And then they felicitate not just suppliers who are technically or operationally doing very well, but also on environmental parameters. So that brings up, that creates that want in the suppliers that, they want to do something more, they want to be seen as green, and they want to be a preferred supplier for those large companies. So definitely the large private sector has a large role to play and encourage the MSMEs doing that.
No, I'm glad you say that, but let me share some experience from maybe 20 years ago, and this is an interesting story. In that time, I used to be with a MNC and based in China, and we were the tier 1 supplier to a really large global retail company. I won't take the name for obvious reasons, right? And sorry, this is 2005, so it's 20 years back, almost. And then we get called for this meeting, a workshop, 2-day workshop, all the tier 1 suppliers, and we're going to talk about energy efficiency. This is 2005. And so we brainstormed with ideas, how we will cut back, how we'll save as suppliers. And at the summary, this team from this big brand said, okay, so this is what you guys have to do, and the cost implication reduction is so much, so this is what's get knocked off from your product prices. So that was the end of the enthusiasm, right? And I think one of the issues we have is when, I was glad to hear the way you were describing, is when larger brands or companies work with their supply chain, they also have to be fair that any cost savings coming out of these measures are not taken one side alone. Otherwise, I think the SME will have no interest beyond a point to kind of work in this, right? So coming to back
Sanjeev, just want to add one more thing here. Yeah. I got a privilege to work with, few of the MSME sectors who are, very much into export business, primarily the auto component sector, the textile sector, and some of the foundry clusters are also, exporting their products outside India. And I found that, these large companies, they, provide, complete support to some of their ancillary units here in India to enhance their productivity, enhance their efficiency as well. And in textile sector, the compliances are very stringent as far as the treatment of their wastewater is concerned. So these global players, in some sense, they are, kind of building the capacities of our SMEs as well.
Right. So I think I want to circle back now to you, Manya, because we talked about the financing challenges, and we have talked about the MSMEs challenges, some experiences out here. But one of the subject that keeps coming up is this ESCO model, where, can it work in India? Lots of sessions have happened on the positives and all of that. Now, if I am an SME and I want to adopt this model, my challenges would be, number one, I think you mentioned contracting itself could be a pain for me, right? What are your thoughts if this was to happen in India? What can make it happen? And is the MSC ever, a small and medium unit, are they likely to adopt this, or will this remain for larger companies only as a solution?
No, I think on the contrary, Sanjeev, I feel the SMEs are more likely to adopt this. I think Sukrit, my friend from Energia, was telling me, one of the best things about an SME, and typically they tend to be in clusters and co-located, is that they compete well with each other. They'll push each other along, they will share nodes. It is different from what large enterprises do, which is very closed door, be very protective of their IP and all those things. SMEs tend to be much more, because they know that they need each other. They know that they need the ecosystem. And therefore, if one of them, and especially one of the earlier ones, adopt this and are seeing good results, I think there's a cascading effect of that in the entire ecosystem. So I strongly feel that the SMEs would be much better at adopting this. I think what is required, and maybe I'll link it back to the term that you had used earlier, Sanjeev, the blended finance piece. I think it requires some of the enablers to fall into place for this to really take off. One of the enablers is contracting, so doing standardized contracting, performance contracting, having clear MNV protocols, having a clear idea of how the payment will happen before we are getting in, because that is what lenders would typically look for. That is one. I think second is blended finance is very important for this space, because again, not all finance is the same. They come in various forms, right? Equity aside. One pool of capital that is very, very required for this to take off at a material level is guarantee schemes, right? And why? Because private capital, I mean, the bar on private capital is very, very high in terms of what is the level of NPAs they can entertain, especially with the latest track record of RBI coming down and whatnot. I think especially if I talk about NBFCs and other kind of vehicles for private capital, AIFs, how much losses you can take, I think that's a very thin line for these capital. And therefore, as we are looking at projects which are very good projects, good IRRs, I think the only question at the back of the mind is, will the repayment happen? What is my method of collection? As an early climate financing platform, how much can I invest on feet on the street to go collect, right? And it's a chicken and egg, because today I'll be hesitant to spend a lot of time putting a whole ground game, like a very large bank, for example. And if I don't do that, then I'm hesitant to invest, right? And therefore, we keep going in circles. If there was some kind of a guarantee scheme, first loss guarantee scheme, which would say, okay, first 20 crores in this cluster is on us, right? It doesn't have to be a government scheme, right? What we are also discovering is, for example, the philanthropic pool of capital in India is growing massively, right? India is obviously becoming richer at the high end, and a lot of philanthropy capital is moving in, which is amazing to see. This could be one great use case for philanthropy capital, where as opposed to giving it for some other scheme, you use it as a force multiplier. A 20 crores spent here can really catalyze 2,000 crores of capital to move in, because you're guaranteeing the risk of the first mover coming in. And then all of this, as we have seen in every other sector, right? The cascading effect, the hockey stick kicks in after the first, second, third, fourth application. Because then people see that this is bankable, this can be done. And then the scale-up, because the need is real. We all talk at this stage, everybody is concurring violently that the need is very real for the SMEs to really go up this curve. I think if some of the contracting elements, blended finance, guarantee scheme can be put in place, I think this is the next renewable energy sector in the making.
No, it's interesting you mentioned that, because yesterday in the keynote address, Sanjeev, from NIF was actually mentioning exactly that he is happy to put money, provided there is that initial sort of guarantee or something coming in from, and I'm not the expert, but I'm guessing that CSR funds may not qualify for that right now, because generally, I think the government and the institutions want to see some direct asset creation with the CSR funds And in this particular case, it'll be indirect because you will be having a cushion and then some asset. But who knows, tomorrow is the budget. And I think a few days back, the MSME minister, Mr. Manji, has said that there'll be a lot of announcements on the finance side tomorrow, so fingers crossed. Hopefully, we'll have some great news for the sector coming from there. If I was to just take this point in a slightly different direction, so Sarabjit, back to you. So this is an ESCO is one situation where either we're talking to a company, but there's another model which is like a demand aggregation. Let's say I aggregate demand and then I do something about it. Maybe BE has done quite a bit of this work with ESL on certain energy efficient products, for example. But if you, from your experience, because you work with a lot of SMEs and different projects, which route works better? Is it that you take a cluster approach and get a cluster? Do you take a membership approach, you get the industry body galvanized, which may or may not be from one geographical cluster, but could be from a larger? Or is it that a large brand you work with and get them to work with their SMEs? Is there a preferred route, or all three have their own challenges? And
Okay. Sanjeev, I think this demand aggregation approach, I think it, purely first, I think the first step, it should be depend upon the clusters. Basically, let's say if we have a foundry cluster, so we know what kind of technologies, what kind of equipments or, processes they follow. And based on that, we can, initiate the demand aggregation process. Like already B and ESL, did some part of the demand aggregation process. But broadly, what I want to also highlight here, that there is a need whenever there is an agency who, have the intervention or activities at the cluster levels. So it is very important to strengthen that ecosystem of that cluster, which includes capacity building of the local service providers, or we call it the technology service providers there. Because if, any X agency goes to the MSMEs, have the energy audits for one day, energy assessments in their plant for one day, and after a week, they suggest them some energy conservation measure. So MSMEs, mostly don't convince at that point. So for convincing them capacity building of local service providers is very essential, and involving them in the processes is very essential. But yes, this demand aggregation part, the options, that 2-3 options you talk about, I think the case basis, it can be the clusters wise as well. And also the demand aggregation process, we need to see that we got the equipments based on the generic need of that particular sector. Like if there is a foundry or the steel sector, we have to study what kind of furnaces they are using, and based on that, we need to have the demand aggregation model for the MSMEs.
So I think we kind of coming towards the last part of our session, and what I'd like to just hear from each one of you is one thought of either an intervention that exists. It could be a policy, it could be a financial mechanism, it could be some technology. If you share your thought with the audience on what is that one thing which you feel is right up there to help scale up energy efficiency adoption in SMEs, just one. Could be policy, could be a mechanism, but not a wish list. I'm saying something that exists at this point. Yeah. Anish, you want to take a shot at it first, and then we just go down the panel? Yeah.
Sure. So something that we understand is in the works, has been talked about, is on public procurement. So as now the green steel taxonomy that Sarabjit shared is out, the next step would be to come up with the green public procurement policy, which defines that at least government contracts or large infrastructure projects could allocate certain percentage of that procurement for green products. So I think that is something very
So the GEM has a reservation, I think, for SMEs on their platform, but not green as such. So you're saying there has to be this taxonomy has to be also clear that what is green,
Right, absolutely. And now that the taxonomy is out, it makes it very much clearer for that procurement policy to come out and say 10% of say an infrastructure project has to be green steel. So that kind of policy push really would be.
So it's a combination you feel of green and it's for MSME to some extent, that they get a preferential treatment or something of that sort. Is it in the procurement?
Right. So yeah, those parameters could be defined as to the carbon intensity as well as the kind of supplier, a certain portion reserved for say an MSME supplier. So those policies could really help.
Manu, your thought?
I would just reiterate that guarantee scheme that works, with the emphasis on that works.
But anything that strikes you that can be scaled up?
I think just that
This is the one.
This is the one thing that would really amplify scale up of energy efficiency financing in the SME space, because that will really give the comfort that people can take a little bit of risk and take a leap of faith and see this industry really mature.
I have some of my colleagues from AEEE here, so we are making a note of what policy next to work on, I think. Mr. Your view?
I think, for the, your question was adoption of the energy conservation thing.
Energy efficiency.
Efficiency.
Yeah, because I always like to make a difference between energy transition and energy efficiency.
Right.
Even in a world where everybody has moved to, let's say, renewables, you'll still have the need for energy efficiency, right?
That's right. That's right. So any kind of equipment, energy efficiency has to be there. So basically, for adopting energy efficiency in the foundry sector, I think one of the most important things is awareness, as we said before.
Okay, so your perspective is to the knowledge sharing?
Yes, awareness at each level, that is the mid-level shop floor managers, as well as, which I said is now more important, IF is focusing on that, is at the ground level of the workers to, train them on climate change, global warming, and how it's going to affect life. Apart from the, when you go in for latest technology for upgrading your equipment for energy efficiency, which in other words will also lead to energy conservation. It will reduce electricity bills, give you more profits for the company. But the added advantage of that is global warming, sustainability, and green. So this kind of awareness is going to be very important for the foundry sector. That is what we have studied at IIF, I think, yeah. And finance, of course, as I said, is another area which has to be looked into for adoption. And for that, we are trying to, from the association, we want to tie up with, organizations like SIDBI, and on the sidelines, I was also talking to Sarabjit, how UNDP can associate more with an association rather than go directly to the foundries, or they're associated with the government sector, but if they associate with the associations can take this forward, because they have a very structured plan to go to about 200 foundries every year and train them on energy efficiency, energy conservation, doing energy audits. And then we have a policy advocacy committee where all the MSMEs can come up with their issues, and the policy advocacy committee puts it up to the government sector. So both finance and awareness, these are two things important for adoption in the foundry sector. Thank you.
Right. I think, Sanjeev, from my point of view, I think technology, if we talk about, it's not...
So this question round was on what is currently available. We'll come to wishful thinking in a bit.
Right.
Yeah.
So primarily, broadly, what I think is we need to strengthen the ecosystem. Let's, plan our projects, let's plan our activities in that way. We strengthen the industry associations that are there at the cluster level. We strengthen the local service providers that are there in the cluster level. We strengthen the state government machinery as well that are there at the cluster level. And let's have a cluster to cluster connect.
But who does that? Is that something that's done through like a development institution supporting it? Is it done through membership organizations? I mean, how would that happen then?
Yes, I think these kind of activities, the ecosystem strengthening can be done by the national government as well, even at the industry association level, because there are many associations across our countries which are already connected, And I think they can also, spread the messages and share the case studies that are there at their cluster, so that it can have a replication effect in other clusters. So I think the connection is very important between all the stakeholders. I think that is a very ideal condition where we can see as a result, more replication happening in the energy efficiency adoption. Yeah.
And if we were to now sort of say wishful thinking, that means it's not there right now, but we always have a chance to push for it through different modes. So from a wishful thinking, what is it that would help scaling up of energy efficiency adoption by SMEs? A new policy, a new mechanism, or something that comes to your mind? Because we won't have experience of it, so I can't even ask you to share your experience. I'm just saying, wishful thinking.
Right. So basically, like I already said, the replication will only happen when these MSMEs sees the benefit in it, benefit and the pilot demonstration. And at the policy level, certainly, like we have the green taxonomy already in place, and we already have a scheme like PAT for bigger industries. And if that kind of a scheme comes for MSMEs as well, with some kind of a target, let's say at the first phase, the voluntary target. So I think that will, pave the way for energy efficiency adoption for MSMEs.
Sab, your view on some wishful thinking aspect which is not there today? No policy, it's not existing.
Well, wishful thinking is, as I said, that from the Foundry Association, we are trying our best to give lots of training to the foundry sector. And we are now focusing mainly on the energy efficiency and carbon balance, this kind of training.
But something from you that the government can come up with, or the private sector institutions, or the development which may help you beyond what you are doing already.
As Sarabjit said, that we also are focusing a lot on clusters, foundry clusters, because the MSME foundry industry is very fragmented. They operate in different, very isolated way. So we are trying to encourage clusters and have a unified kind of representation through the clusters to have energy efficiency adoption. That is what we are planning actually. Yeah.
Mane, for you, something which is not there right now.
Yeah. No, for me, it's mainly green reinsurance. And I'll tell you what I mean by that, right? So, see, ultimately, insurance is another very key lever for providing comfort, if anything, right?
No, and who should do that is also going to be interesting to know.
Yes, yes, I was coming to that. So, for a large part, insurance is a very analytical sector, very actuarial, very, they say parametric insurance, right? Because you know exactly what risks you're undertaking. You can model the probability of those risks manifesting, and therefore what is the impact of those, so it's risk score times probability is what impact you're looking at, and how do you then insure against those risks, right? So it's a very mathematical equation. Unfortunately, this equation hasn't kept up with times. And as we have discovered time and again, a lot of the climate events which are happening in LA wildfires, the latest case in point, insurance has put up their hand and said this we can't take care of, right? So there's a huge movement, especially in the Western economy, US, Europe, around how do we get better and more targeted insurance policies and have options on the table that one can choose from, right? So when we look at that, when we look at what is available in India, it's actually mind-boggling that it is so straight-jacketed. I can take an insurance plan, but I'm not sure what is covered in that. I will take it just for the comfort of the fact that I've checked the box. And when I take it to a co-lender, they would say, yes, you have done the insurance coverage. But if you ask me hand to heart, what is the coverage I'm getting, I don't know. I'm paying for a black box. Now, the amount of work that is happening in this space is pretty amazing. It is a wish list. So, case in point, the first green reinsurance company just got funded last week, called Greenie RE, a large conglomerate of influential, wealthy donors. They put in $200 million to prop up this green reinsurance company, which will honor claims made by insurance companies, again, against climate change disasters and things like that. Small number, $200 million.
So you're hoping for industry segment to develop here which is able to provide insurance to an SME who is willing to invest now in energy efficiency technology. Is that what
That's exactly the point, because that will reduce the risk of untoward incidents, which gets factored into your basic quote. Because
Alright.
you're not getting coverage there, you load it on the debt price, and again, it makes the project unviable.
Interesting. That could be a very interesting. Just on, an aligned point, I know that the government is working on, maybe we might have an announcement tomorrow, is the collateral piece, which is the other when you borrow for SMEs, right? So you have to have a collateral typically. Non-collateral covers certain categories, but let's say energy efficiency, if I want to get finance, there's some challenges. And I think they're looking now at newer ways of evaluating, which includes looking at your GST payment record rather than your asset. So your balance sheet is not important. What is important is how your business is running right now. And maybe a combination of 2-3 of these things comes in, and that could be quite a game changer for perhaps on that front. Anish, your thought on some wishful things that can happen here, which may...
Sure. So, as a consultant, we love data. So, a technology platform, as we were talking about the data challenge, that serves the purpose of both capturing the current baselines, measuring how energy efficiency measures are leading to reductions, as well as they can also serve the purpose of, bringing the SME sector into the carbon markets. So that they can avail the benefits of carbon credits. And some of those benefits can actually fund this kind of a technology platform as well. So really
for an SME, the incentive to become more energy efficient because of, away from drivers, like let's say the brand or the buyer is asking, or you're saying one could be to participate in a carbon market, and you need data for that. Is there any other way that could be incentivized, again in energy efficiency, or largely from credits? Because that, I think the government is again working on that scheme, right?
Right. So I think it's the question of monetizing that saving or that initiative that the SME is taking. So carbon credits definitely form that crucial instrument that they can use to monetize that.
Well, ticket sizes will be very small, so you will need some mechanism to aggregate that to monetize, I suppose.
Right, and that aggregation could happen through tech-enabled platforms which capture the data as well as help them monetize through carbon credits.
All right. Okay.
Just one point.
Yeah, please.
As Sarabjit said, that we are in the future also looking for our association to be associated with local stakeholders. And I was also talking to Minal on the sidelines that if we can build tools to monitor energy efficiency in the MSME foundries and guide them to track the energy efficiency, that is another area that we would like to focus on in the future, get associated with organizations like AEEE, where they can assist with local stakeholders on the technology platform for adopting energy efficiency.
Oh, thank you for that. I think that's a useful idea. So we now are at the end of our session, but I think the audience may have some questions for the panel. So I'll open up the floor if there are questions. If you please just mention your name, your organization, and the question, and please keep it pretty direct to the point. Thank you.
I'm K.K. Roy Chaudhary, consultant energy environment. Given MSMEs contribute to about 30% of GDP, more than 50% of exports, and around 70% of employment. What are we doing to the sector, given that the majority of their energy conservation is accounted for by prime movers, motors. So that is a focus point, and they are not, and for other remedial measures also, like taking solar benefits from the grid. What are the services being offered to them so that they can select proper energy efficient motors, then take power in a green green pod. So they are mostly lacking in knowledge of basic things about all these. I mean, lack of they're suffering from lack of information, proper information, and to drive that are service providers. They're not knowing about reliable service providers. What are the efforts being taken up to connect them to appropriate service providers, which they can rely on and they can positively contribute?
Yeah, I'll ask Saibal to just respond because I think he made that point about knowledge. But Saibal, would you like to just quickly respond?
Yeah, that's exactly what we are doing, sir, with our association, is trying to train up all the foundries. In IF, we are running a program called Urja Sanchay, which I was piloting in the Western region, being in the chair. Now we are going to take it on a national scene, where we are going to train the foundries with hands-on shop floor training to the middle-level managers as well as the ground-level workers on upgrading technology and also using the existing technology in the correct way. Like when you're using an induction furnace, you really need to know a bit about the refractory lining, the thickness of the lining, the ramming tool, the vibratory tool. So we train all this, and it's all hands-on, hands-held training. So it's very project-oriented, not just a program. So that is how we are taking them, and then we also take the local stakeholders. Like in a foundry, you have a sand plant, you have a compressor. As these partners, to train them, we have refractory people who make refractory linings. So we conduct the programs for melting, talking about the furnace and all the allied parameters along with the furnace. So association is taking this forward to all the MSME foundries. I think that answers your question.
Yeah, maybe let me also add that this is an example for your region, your foundry. But on an India level, we do have some gaps. Some clusters, some associations are much more advanced and some are not so advanced. And I think your original point was that the knowledge gaps have to be filled.
Yes.
Sometimes we see success somewhere, we assume everybody has that knowledge, and it's, you know, you can go to the internet and pick this up and why this is not being done, but the reality is quite different.
Yeah, and we are taking it pan-India now. And one of the reasons we are getting a very good response is we are linking it up with the commercial benefit. So when we give a training, we tell them that these are the, you know, megawatt power units that you can save. And they're actually experiencing the savings if they implement our trainers' ideas. Yeah.
Mr. Shane, that we are finding that in the West and in China, they are using electrical furnaces which are basically able to produce smart materials, for example, with carbon fiber, titanium, etc. But in India, we are using still these fossil fuel, furnaces, and basically they are produce very low value-added steel, you know, which are not conducive as far as for automobile industry or for building materials or even for latest, you know, use cases. So how can we, innovate on that front? Because if that is not the case, we will have to import more and more of such type of material from of carbon fiber, etc. You know, which is going to be a lot more. Because they innovate quite fast and they are used in a lot of these technologies in space, in renewables, etc. So how can we, go towards that path? Thanks.
Yeah, you're right that in India still we have lots of iron foundries using a cupola. Now in a cupola, coke is the main fuel, and then you have emissions of sulfur dioxide, nitrogen dioxide, carbon dioxide, etc. So that is one of the basic points of our program, Urja Sanchay. We are training them on induction melting, on induction furnaces, and trying to bring home to them the point that, you know, go electrical rather than going for coke and as a fossil-based fuel. So we are in the process of that, and the only challenge in that is the upfront investment for an induction furnace. It's much higher. So that is where finance then comes in. So it's all interlinked, the whole thing, between finance and the awareness of knowledge. Yeah.
So I'm just curious, is there this program of yours, is this running now? For how long is this?
You see, I started this program in June of last year.
So it's a new program.
A new program. We've done about 30 foundries in the western region, and the estimated savings for the foundry is come to about 11 crores annually. Based on it may not be a very big number, but for 30 foundries, it's substantial in the for MSMEs. And it is based on implementation of certain ideas where they are not even changing the equipment, just telling them how to do it better. As I said, the refractory lining, the ramming, the vibration, and the process parameters control, etc. Just that is leading to a benefit of about 11 crores of rupees annually for these 30 foundries, and they have implemented it already partially, and they've given us reports, which I have, which says that yes, it's working. Yeah, but it'll go pan-India in the next year. Yeah.
Hello. Yeah, hi. I have a question for Manya. Are you also financing community-based models, basically a subscription model kind of projects, in which, let's say suppose within a cluster there are 10 to 15 MSAs nearby, and you provide a common, say suppose there are foundries, so you provide them with the WHRB, the functioning WHRB, giving them the steam for that, steam as a service or cooling as a service. Are you financing into that?
Yeah, very much. I think, the short answer is yes. I think the long answer is that every mature economy goes from asset ownership to asset leasing to asset as a service, right? I think we are, in many sectors, we are on the other end, like solar is asset as a service with the PPA model. In energy efficiency, primarily, I think we are making the transition from asset ownership to asset leasing, where at least we believe that we can help with that transition in many cases. And the next evolution of that is asset as a service, right? And therefore, we are very keen to see that happen. We see some early conversations on cooling as a service type asks, which are quite exciting. I think the model needs a little bit of a fix, especially for financing providers who need a return likelihood to come in. And therefore, where do you draw the base load, and where do you start the variability of that model to come in? I think those needs to mature, but I think, yes, that is the path that we are on, and we would love to be a part of that transition.
I have a follow-up question, basically. So what would you rather like better? You were talking about the risks involved with the MSEs project. So a lot of time we know that M&B doesn't happen, and there is a lack of trust from the owner side also. Once I have invested this much amount of money, what's the guarantee that it's going to benefit me that way, which is intended on the paper? So as a guarantee, who would you rather it be? Like if it would be the state government back guarantee, or do you want it to be there are some risk insurances also available in the market. Based on the credit profile of the company, they can give you some guarantees based on their liquidity, at what level they are. So what would be a better functioning model?
We'll take whatever works. There's no preference one way or the other. I think the guarantee schemes don't work in reality. They are crafted on paper, so a lot of work needs to happen there. The insurance products that you mentioned, the premiums are so high that it kind of obviates the need of the insurance itself. So there's work needed to be done, but we would take whatever works in that context.
And that's the area you had mentioned that needs to come up, right? So whilst the scheme or something may be there, practically doesn't work at this point. Okay. Thank you so much for your thoughts, your experience, your wisdom. I'm sure there'll be a lot of takeaways for the audience. Thank you very much for you.
Hello. Sir, can you move to the front of the stage for a photograph, please? Now, if you would say, I would request Mr. Sumit Agarwal to please take the stage and present the speakers with a token of gratitude.